In the last couple of videos, we have been exploring the meaning of words. We started this discussion with the observation that a very useful feature of using words is that, even though words are inherently ambiguous, the use of words excludes a great many unwanted meanings, so greatly cuts down on the amount of work that needs to be done by people trying to infer the meanings we intend to convey through the messages we send. In video 4, we introduced the idea of categories, and suggested that words can be thought of as labels for categories of things and ideas, and that if a thing or idea has the features common to the category for which a word is the label, it is a member of that category and can be referred to by that word. We also noticed that the group of things that a given word can point to can be added to when new things to point to come along. This seems to work best when the new things share something in common with the things the word is currently used to point to. In videos 5 and 6, we'll explore the idea of categories a bit more in depth and see that things are not as simple as our previous observations may have seemed to imply. How do you know a knife when you see one? What aspects of a knife make it a knife? To get the most from this topic, pause the video while you think about that for a few minutes and articulate a definition to yourself, then hit play when you're ready to continue. Now let's test your definition by seeing how well it serves to determine whether the items we'll encounter fit into the category knife. Let's start with these. Are these knives? And how about these? And this? What about a machete? Is that a knife? Is a knife still a knife if all you have is a blade? How about just a handle? Do they need to be connected? A jackknife is a knife, right? What about when you don't see the blade? Is it still a knife? Would you say a utility knife is a knife? How about this? Or this? How about a razor? Is this a knife? And this? What if a knife has teeth? Are serrated knives still knives? But what about this one? Is this a knife? Or a saw? How about these? Are these knives? Why not? How about this? Or this? But this one is a knife. How about these? Are the ones in the middle knives? Or spatulas? Or one of each? These are knives, and this isn't. Is this a knife? How about this thing with two handles? Or this thing? What about this? Or this? This is called a cheese knife. And some people call this a cheese knife too. What about this? Is this a knife? Or this? These are called palette knives. They are used to paint with. Do you consider them knives? How about this thing used to lay bricks? And what about a nail file? It looks kind of like a knife. Or does it belong in a different category? Is this a knife? How about this? I'm pretty sure this one isn't a knife. What about a sickle? Is a sickle a knife? How about a letter opener? Is that a knife? And what about this thing? It contains a bunch of blades that are from things that are not knives, and only one knife blade. Why do we still call it a knife? If that knife blade goes away, is it still a knife? If we saw it when all the blades are closed, we'd still call it a knife, no matter what it contained. Can knives be toys? Does it matter that they're made of plastic? Is this plastic knife a toy? Is it even a knife? And what about this? Is this a knife? Since you're not here, you don't get to actually weigh in on any of this. But from experience with other people, I'll guess that most of you agree that these are knives, while these are not. And since you may not know what all of these are, I'll tell you that many people, and possibly most, call them knives. These do not typically get labeled as knives, but lots of people feel like they really are knives of a kind, and though some people call these knives, they are kind of uncomfortable saying that they really are. And finally, this thing. Everybody knows it's a knife, but lots of people also want to say it's a tool. So we've got a bit of a range. These are definitely knives, and these are definitely not, and these are somewhere in the middle. What does that say about our category? Let's go back to your definition of knife. How did it stack up? Let's go back through our examples and see if we need to adjust our definitions to better fit the data. Again, since you're not here, I'll have to put words in your mouths. Sorry. Let's begin by saying that a knife has a handle and a flat blade, and that the blade is sharp, well, sharpish, along at least one edge. But then we run into this thing, which fits that description perfectly, but is not a knife. Why not? Well, it's a sword, and swords are bigger, so maybe it has to do with size. So as not to get bogged down with details, let's just say that a knife has to be the right size. So how about these? They're a little smaller. Is either one a knife? Or is there something else about them that creates a problem? And how about these? They fit the description, but are they knives? Lots of people have trouble saying that they are. The issue may not be so much what they look like, but rather how they work. Knives cut by slicing. The thing on the left, it is, by the way, a drywall saw, cuts by sawing, and the things on the right cut by whacking. If that's the issue, then part of our description of a knife needs to include not only how it looks, but how it works as well. Okay then, if sawing makes something a saw, why is this thing still a knife? The answer I'm going to suggest, and we can test this as we go, is that we use that thing with food, and if we use something with food, we are not going to call it a saw. We eat with a knife and fork, not a saw and fork. And even if we're sawing through a stale loaf of bread or a tough piece of meat, we're using a knife to do it. The use with food criterion affects our perception of other implements as well. Lots of people feel like that cleaver we just considered actually is a knife, even if it cuts by whacking. This weird pizza cutter is often called a pizza knife, possibly because pizza is food. And even this thing gets called a pastry knife, even though it certainly doesn't look much like any other knife. Perhaps because it looks so different, it is also called a pastry cutter, and thus gets placed in a category of other things that cut, but aren't knives. Our definition of a knife is getting a little longer. How well does it fit a palette knife and a putty knife? Both have a handle and a flat blade, and both are the right size. I'm not sure about the sharp edge, though, and I'm pretty sure that neither one is used to slice anything. Why do they get counted as knives? Let's think about the table knife. While it can slice some things, another important function it serves is to spread butter, jam, and other paste-like things onto food. While the items on the right don't fit the slicing function of knives, they are used to spread paste-like substances. We'll add that function to our description and see how it holds up as we go. Here's another item that fits the criteria, but isn't a knife. What's the problem this time? While spatulas are very knife-like, they have another specialized function that earns them a category of their own. When knives are used to slice into something, they are creating a discontinuity in what had been a continuous substance. Think about cutting through meat or bread or a piece of rope. Spatulas, on the other hand, are used to separate food from preparation services, whether a grill, a frying pan, or the inside of a mixing bowl. Straight razors are also very knife-like, but a number of native English speakers do not feel comfortable classifying them as knives. Might this be because they feel uncomfortable with the thought of them slicing the skin they shave? Razors are meant to cut hair very close to skin that we would just as soon leave intact. At any rate, these very knife-like items are more readily categorized with some very unknife-like items that perform the same function. A scalpel, though it doesn't have the word knife in its name, and looks different than a typical knife, functions exactly like a knife is supposed to. Nobody disagrees that a scalpel is a knife. On the other hand, a letter opener looks like a knife. But is it a knife? Even dictionaries say that it looks like a knife, and don't go so far as saying it is one. Letter openers are instead categorized according to function with a motley assortment of other things that we use to open closed containers. Letter openers, razors, and spatulas highlight the importance of function in determining what is and what is not a knife. While looking like a knife is significant, what a thing looks like is not in itself determinative in linguistic categorization. A toy knife looks like a knife, too, but hopefully doesn't function like a knife. Do we still say it's a knife? The answer seems to be, it's a knife, but not a real knife. Toys are things whose job it is to remind us of something else. A toy knife is a knife in that it reminds us of a real knife. The next item is truly on the fence. It looks an awful lot like a spatula, and some people actually call it an icing spatula. What it's meant to do, though, is spread frosting on things, and other people call it a frosting knife. This one spreads mortar, usually after scooping it up and depositing it on bricks. Though it looks a lot like some of the other things that are called knives, and though it spreads a pasty substance, it's not called a knife, but a trowel. It also resembles a garden trowel, and the wet, sandy mortar it scoops and spreads is more like mud than frosting. After all that pondering, what's become of our definition? To our original physical description, we've added a size restriction and limitations on function. We've also said that whether or not an item is used with food can be a factor. Does this collection of criteria count as a definition? Not so much. In fact, very few of the items we consider knives fulfill all of these criteria. To qualify as a knife, it appears to be sufficient to only satisfy some of them, and to not have certain other attributes that would qualify a thing as belonging to a different category, like a letter opener or a spatula. In our next video, number 6, we'll take a closer look at how categories relate to other categories.